Get out of my workshop right now. Gareth's voice hit the walls of my own garage, like he was the one who built it. I stood in the doorway holding a wrench I had owned for 30 years, looking at my son-in-law sitting in my chair, his friends spread around my workbench, poker chips stacked where my tools should have been, beer cans on top of my tool cabinet, cigarette smoke hanging in the air. My daughter Sophie was leaning against the wall behind him. When Gareth pointed at the door, she laughed. Not at him, with him. I want to be clear about that. She laughed with him. My name is Leonard Whitfield. I'm 63 years old, widowed, and for the last 5 years I have been living quietly in my own personal nightmare inside a house I paid for myself. Let me back up so you understand how it got to that point. When Sophie brought Gareth home for the first time 6 years ago, I gave him every benefit of the doubt a father could give. He was 32, confident, always talking. At that first dinner, he spent 2 hours telling me about a car repair shop he was planning to open. Big numbers, big plans. I noticed he never once asked me anything about my life. Not my job, not how I was doing since my wife passed. Nothing. But Sophie looked happy sitting next to him. So I kept my thoughts to myself. The wedding was 5 years ago. I helped pay for a good portion of it. At the reception, they sat me at a table in the back near the bar, next to people I had never met in my life. Gareth's family had the seats up front near the couple. I sat there the whole evening, eating my chicken, watching my daughter dance with a man who had not bothered to ask me a single question since the day we met. I drove home alone that night and told myself it was their day. That was the first of many things I talked myself out of feeling. 8 months after the wedding, Sophie showed up at my front door with 2 suitcases and that look she always had as a kid when she had done something she needed to explain. The car shop had failed. Gareth had gotten in over his head with some loans. They just needed a place to stay while things settled down. My house had 3 bedrooms. I was there alone. Of course I said yes. That was 5 years ago. Things never settled down. The first few months were manageable. Gareth was out during the day, supposedly job hunting. Sophie helped around the house sometimes. I kept my routine. Up at 6, coffee, into work by 7, home by 5, make dinner. I have lived that way for 30 years and I was not about to change it. But Gareth started finding his footing in my house, and not in a good way. It started small. Leonard, could you keep the noise down on weekday mornings? We sleep in late. I changed when I made my coffee. Leonard, your truck is blocking the driveway and I need to get out. I started parking on the street. Leonard, this garage situation is getting out of hand. All this junk. Can you at least keep the door closed so the neighbors do not have to look at it? That garage he called junk was my workshop. I had built that space over 30 years. Every tool had a place. Every shelf had a purpose. My wife used to bring me coffee out there on Saturday mornings and sit on the stool near the door while I worked. That workshop was the one place in the world that was completely mine. I kept the door closed because I was trying to keep the peace. About a year in, Gareth stopped pretending to look for work. Sophie told me he was reassessing his direction. I did not say anything. 2 years in, he was still reassessing. He was on my couch every afternoon when I got home, watching my TV, eating food I had bought, treating my house like a furnished apartment he had not gotten around to paying rent on. Sophie had started working part-time at a clothing boutique downtown. She was gone most of the day. When she was home, she spent most of her time with Gareth. I was background, I was furniture, I was the man who paid the utilities and stayed out of the way. Then came the incidents that I now think of as the turning point, the things that moved this from uncomfortable to something that had a harder name. One evening I came home to find Gareth's friend Stuart sitting at my kitchen table, going through a stack of mail. Not his mail, my mail. He looked up when I walked in and said Gareth had told him it was fine. Gareth was in the shower. I picked up my mail, put it in my room, and did not say a word to either of them. Another time, Gareth told me his parents were coming for the weekend and asked if I could make myself scarce during the days, not leave. Just stay in my bedroom or the backyard so they could have the living room. I'm a 63-year-old man, and my son-in-law asked me to hide in my own house so his parents could be comfortable. I stayed in the backyard both days. I told myself it was temporary. The workshop incident happened on a Saturday afternoon in October. I had a small repair job to finish that afternoon. Nothing complicated, just replacing a fitting on an old pipe wrench I had been putting off for a week. I went down to the garage around 2 in the afternoon, reached for the door handle, and heard voices inside before I even touched it. I opened the door. Gareth was sitting in my chair at the center workbench. 4 of his friends were spread around the garage on the stools and the old cooler I kept by the wall. Cards on the table, poker chips stacked across my work surface. Someone had pushed my socket set to the side to make room. There were beer cans on top of my tool cabinet and an ashtray that did not belong to me sitting right next to my belt sander. Gareth looked up at me the way you look at someone who has just walked into the wrong room. Hey, can you give us some space? This is not a retirement home. His friends went quiet. One of them looked down at his cards. I looked past Gareth at Sophie. She was leaning against the wall near the shelving unit. She had heard it. She knew exactly what he had said and exactly where we were standing. She smiled. A small smile, quick, but I saw it. She smiled at him like he had said something worth smiling at. I stood there for another second. Then I turned around and walked back upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the surface, not because I was about to do something, just to feel something solid under me. My chest was doing something I did not have a clean word for. Not anger exactly, something colder than anger. I had been cooking in that house for 30 years. I had laid the tile in that kitchen myself. I had built every shelf in that workshop with my own hands on weekends over the course of about 2 years, one shelf at a time. And I had just been told to leave my own garage by a man who had not paid a single bill in this house in 5 years. And my daughter had smiled about it. I sat at that table for about an hour. I could hear them laughing down in the garage. At some point, Sophie came up, walked through the kitchen, did not say anything to me, and went into the bedroom she shared with Gareth. That evening, around 8, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I was in my room reading. It was a text from Bernard Kaufman. Bernard had been my accountant for 20 years. He had been my late wife's accountant before that. He was not a man who texted casually. The message said, "Leonard, urgent. Call me when you can. Someone has attempted to initiate a refinancing on your property using a forged power of attorney. I caught it at the bank. We need to talk tomorrow morning first thing." I read it 3 times. Then I listened to the sounds coming from down the hall. Gareth's voice, low, Sophie laughing at something he said. I called Bernard back that night instead of waiting. He picked up on the second ring. He told me a loan application had come through on my property. The house was valued at $380,000. Someone had submitted paperwork claiming I had signed a power of attorney over to my daughter Sophie, giving her authority to act on my behalf regarding the property. Bernard said the signature did not match anything in my file. He had seen enough documents in 20 years to know when something was off. He had flagged it with the bank immediately, and they had put a hold on the application. The name on the originating paperwork was Gareth Nolan. He was trying to pull $150,000 against my house. Bernard had done a little digging after the bank called him. Gareth had debts totaling close to $85,000. Credit cards, a failed business investment from 2 years back. Money owed to private parties who were not being patient. He was underwater, and he had decided my house was his way out. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the photograph on my nightstand. My wife and me, the summer before she got sick. We were standing in front of the first Cornerstone Supply location, the one I had just opened. She had her arm around me and she was grinning like I had just done something she always knew I could do. I had opened that store the year after she passed. I needed something to hold on to, something to build. I had started small, just me and one employee and a rented space on the edge of town. Over the next 30 years, that one store became 4, Cornerstone Supply. I had kept it quiet because after my wife was gone, I wanted to know that the people around me were there for me, not for what I had, not for what they might eventually get. I thought about that decision sitting there in my bedroom listening to Gareth's voice coming through the wall. Then I called Bernard back and told him one thing. Do not unfreeze anything. Put alerts on every property I own, every one. He asked how many we were talking about. I told him. There was a long pause on the line. Leonard, he said, they have no idea, do they? No, I said. They think I have one small hardware store. What do you want to do? I looked at the photograph again. Then I turned off the light. I want to wait, I said, and I want to watch. The next morning I called Bernard before 7. I told him to put legal holds on every asset I owned. The house, the 4 store locations, the 2 rental properties, the investment accounts. All of it locked down so that nothing could move without my signature and his verification. He had it done by noon. Then I started paying attention in a different way. I had always been a quiet man. My wife used to say I observed more than I spoke, and she meant it as a compliment. I started using that. I watched Gareth's schedule. I noticed when he made phone calls and where he went to make them. I noticed which mail he picked up off the counter before I could get to it. I noticed how he and Sophie talked differently when they thought I was not in the room. 3 days after the Bernard call, my neighbor Harriet knocked on my front door. She was 70 years old and had lived next door for nearly 25 years. Sharp woman. She told me she had seen a man she did not recognize walking the perimeter of my property that morning with a clipboard, writing things down and taking photographs of the exterior. She had written down his license plate number out of habit. She handed me the paper with the plate on it and apologized for bothering me. I told her she was never a bother. I meant it. I passed the plate number to Bernard. He had a contact run it. The car was registered to a property appraisal company 2 counties over. Gareth had ordered an appraisal of my house without telling me, without asking. He had sent a man to photograph and measure my property like it already belonged to him. That same week, Gilbert called me. Gilbert Reeves had been my general manager at Cornerstone Supply for 15 years. He was the kind of man who noticed things and knew when to pick up the phone. He told me he had been coming out of the diner near our main location on Tuesday afternoon when he saw Gareth standing outside a law office 2 doors down talking to a man in a suit. Gilbert had not thought much of it until he heard the words property transfer and elderly owner through the open window as he walked past. He called me that evening. The man in the suit turned out to be Stuart Page. I recognized the name from a few years back. Stuart ran a financial consulting operation that had a reputation for finding creative solutions that were not always clean. He and Gareth had been connected for years. I had Bernard put his contacts on Stuart as well. One evening about a week later, I was reading in my room when I heard Gareth talking in the hallway. His voice was low, but the house was quiet and the walls were not thick. I heard him say, "Same notary did not work, so we go 2 counties out this time. Different name on the filing. She signs it in front of witnesses, and by the time anyone checks the original, it is already recorded." He meant Sophie. I sat with that for a long time after he went back to the bedroom. I thought about calling Sophie in and putting everything on the table right then. I thought about how much easier it would be to just end it that night. Say what I knew, tell them both to leave, be done with it. I even picked up my phone. I had Sophie's name on the screen. My thumb was right there. Then I heard Gareth laugh at something loud and easy from behind the bedroom door. Like a man with no weight on him at all. I put the phone down. Not yet. The next day, I drove to the Cornerstone Supply headquarters location and sat in my office for the first time in a few months. I usually ran things from home, by phone and email. Gilbert handled the daily operations without needing much from me. But that day, I needed to be in that building. I needed to remember what I had actually built. I sat at my desk and looked at the numbers Gilbert had put together for the quarter. 4 locations, combined revenue tracking above projections. The downtown store was the strongest. The newest location on the east side was still finding its footing but trending right. Total net worth across all assets, including properties and accounts, was sitting at approximately $2.08 million. My son-in-law was trying to steal a $380,000 house from a man with $2.08 million in assets because he assumed the man had nothing. I asked Gilbert to prepare a complete documentation package, every property deed, every business registration, every account statement. I told him I needed it in a folder, clean, ready to present. He did not ask why. That was one of the reasons I had kept him around for 15 years. Then I drove home and told Gareth and Sophie I had been thinking seriously about the house situation. I said I was getting older, and maybe it made sense to think about simplifying things. I said I needed a few more weeks to consider the details, but I was open to a conversation. Gareth's whole posture changed when I said it. He relaxed in a way that told me everything I needed to know about how confident he already was. "Take all the time you need, Leonard," he said. I nodded and went back to my room. I had a few more things to set up first. I had Bernard arrange for a licensed technician to install security cameras inside the house, all legal. "It is your property," Bernard reminded me. "You have every right." They went in while Gareth and Sophie were out on a Thursday afternoon, small units, nothing obvious. Living room, kitchen, hallway near the front door. The technician showed me how to pull up the footage on my phone. 2 days later, I was in the backyard with my coffee when I got an alert. Motion in the living room. I opened the app and watched Gareth sit down on the couch across from Stuart Page. I turned the volume up on my phone. The audio was not perfect, but it was clear enough. Stuart was talking about a notary he used in a neighboring county. Someone who had handled similar paperwork before and understood how to keep things quiet. He said the key was getting Sophie to sign before she had time to think too carefully about what she was signing. Frame it as protecting the family. Tell her it was just a formality to make sure she was covered if anything happened to Leonard. Stuart had done it before. He knew how to present documents so they looked routine. Gareth listened and nodded. Then he said, "And once it records, how long before he could contest it?" Stuart said, "By the time any challenge gets filed, you have already drawn on the loan. The money is moved. Legal process takes months. You're fine." I saved the full recording and sent the file to Bernard within the hour. Bernard called me back in 10 minutes. His voice was steady, but I could tell he was angry in that quiet way that careful men get angry. He said, "This is enough, Leonard. We can take this to the authorities right now. Conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery. Stuart could lose everything." I told him not yet. I had one more thing I wanted to do first. Gareth announced the BBQ about a week later, framed it as a casual get-together, a nice afternoon in the backyard. He invited his parents Marvin and Beverly Nolan, his sisters Carolyn and Lorraine, a handful of friends. He told me I was welcome to join if I wanted, which was generous of him considering it was my backyard. I knew what it really was. He was close enough to the finish line that he wanted people around to celebrate with. He just had not told them yet what they were celebrating. I let him plan it. I let him buy the food and set up the chairs and invite whoever he wanted. I spent that week making 2 phone calls. One to Bernard, telling him to be at my house by 3 in the afternoon on Saturday, and to bring the full documentation package Gilbert had prepared. One to Sophie, asking her to take a walk with me the morning before the BBQ. Sophie and I walked around the block Saturday morning. She was quieter than usual. I think she already knew something had shifted in the air, but she could not locate exactly what it was. I did not accuse her of anything on that walk. I asked her how she was doing. I asked if she was happy. She gave me the kind of answers people give when they are not being fully honest but are not ready to lie directly either. Fine, things are complicated. Gareth is under a lot of pressure. I said, I know he is. I know more about that than you might think. She looked at me but did not ask what I meant. We walked the rest of the block without talking much. By 2 in the afternoon, the backyard was full. Marvin was at the grill telling a loud story about a car deal he had closed last month. Beverly and Carolyn were at the patio table. Lorraine was on her phone. Garrett's friends were clustered near the cooler. Stuart Page was there too, standing near the fence looking relaxed. I stayed inside until Bernard arrived at 3. Then I put on a clean shirt, picked up the folder Bernard handed me at the front door, and walked outside. The yard went a little quieter when people noticed me come through the back door with a man they did not recognize carrying a leather briefcase. Gareth clocked it immediately. I watched his expression move from surprise to something more guarded. I walked to the center of the patio and waited until I had the attention of everyone there. I want to say a few things before this afternoon goes any further, I said. I apologize for interrupting. This will not take long. Marvin started to say something jovial. I did not let him finish. Gareth, I said, I want to start with you. You have been living in my house for 5 years. In that time, you have not paid rent, not contributed to utilities, not held steady work. I did not ask you for any of that. Sophie is my daughter, and this is her home too, as far as I am concerned. What I did not agree to and what I did not know about until recently was this. Bernard opened the briefcase and set the first set of documents on the patio table. These are the bank records showing a loan application filed against my property without my knowledge or consent. With a forged signature on a power of attorney document. The yard was very quiet now. Gareth's face had gone the color of old concrete. Stuart took a small step back toward the fence like he was thinking about whether the gate was unlocked. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table next to the documents. I pressed play. Gareth's voice came out of the speaker, clear enough for everyone standing in that backyard to hear. Stuart's voice followed. The notary, the loan, the plan to get Sophie to sign before she thought too carefully about what she was putting her name on. Nobody moved. Carolyn set her drink down on the armrest. Marvin had stopped talking. Beverly had both hands in her lap and was looking at a spot on the ground somewhere between her feet and the table. Gareth started to speak. I let him get about 4 words out, and then I kept going. I also want you all to know something about me, I said, because most of you have spent the last several years forming an opinion about who I am based on what you could see. A quiet man. A widower, a man who drives an old truck and keeps to himself and has a small hardware store on the edge of town. Bernard reached into the briefcase and began laying out the second set of documents. Property deeds, business registrations, account statements, Cornerstone Supply, 4 locations. I opened the first one 30 years ago, the year after my wife passed. I built every one of them myself, one at a time, without a partner and without any help I did not pay for. I watched Lorraine lean over to look at the papers on the table. I watched Marvin's jaw tighten. Total net worth across all assets, Bernard said, not looking up from the folder, is approximately $2.8 million. Sophie made a sound I had not heard from her since she was a child. A small sound like the air going out of something. I kept it quiet. I said because I wanted to know that the people in my life were there for me. Not for what I had, not for what they might eventually get their hands on. I wanted real. I wanted honest. I looked at Gareth. I did not get it. Gareth tried once more. He said it was complicated, that they were desperate, that I did not understand the pressure they were under, I said. I understand exactly the pressure you were under. $85,000 in debt is a hard place to be. If you had come to me as a man and told me the truth, I would have listened. I might have helped, but you chose a different path. Then I said what needed to be said about the consequences. Gareth was to be out of my house by the following Friday. Bernard had prepared the legal documentation making clear that any further attempt to access, encumber, or transfer any of my assets would result in immediate criminal referral. Stuart Page had already been reported to the state licensing board. That process was moving on its own. Sophie could stay. Those were my terms, and I meant them. She was my daughter, and I was not going to put her on the street. But she had 60 days to find work and 90 days to find her own place. I would pay the $85,000 Gareth owed directly to the creditors, not through either of them, so it was finished and could not come back. She would see a therapist weekly, no exceptions, and if anything changed, if any further attempt was made on anything I owned, that offer disappeared. I picked up my phone and my coffee cup and I went back inside. Bernard stayed another 20 minutes to answer any questions. I did not hear what was said. I was in the workshop. I stood in there for a long time by myself. The tools were back where they belonged. The workbench was clean. I took the old ball-peen hammer off the pegboard, the one my wife had wrapped in tissue paper, and a bow the Christmas before she got sick. She had laughed the whole time I opened it. Said every man needed a good hammer. I held it for a while. Then I hung it back on its hook and went to make coffee. Gareth was gone by Wednesday. Sophie and I had a hard conversation at the kitchen table 2 days after the BBQ. I did not raise my voice. I just said one thing that I needed her to hear. You laughed, Sophie. You stood right there in that garage and you laughed. She cried for a long time. I let her. 6 months have gone by since that afternoon. Sophie has her own apartment now. She calls every Sunday, and the conversations are real ones. She is working and going to therapy and doing the hard work of figuring out who she is without someone else running the show. I'm proud of her for that, even if I do not always say it. I still go to work every morning. I still come home and make my own dinner. And most evenings before I go in, I stop in the workshop for a few minutes. Just to stand there, just to remember. Nobody handed me any of this. I built it myself, year by year, with work and patience and a willingness to stay quiet until the right moment. If you have been the man in the background, the one who keeps the lights on while others take up all the space, hear this. Your work is real. What you built is real. You do not need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to know your own worth and be willing to defend it when the time comes. That time always comes. Be ready.